Why shouldn't we fall in love? Our hearts are made of it. Let's take a chance. Why be afraid of it, honey? Papa, today, let's close our eyes and make our own paradise. Little we know of it, still we can try to make a go of it. Oh, baby, we might have been meant for each other. To be or not to be, let our hearts discover, sweet mama. Oh, baby, let's fall in love. Why shouldn't we fall in love? Now is the time for it while we're young. Let's fall in love.
Jumping and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your mother's good looking. So hush, little baby, and don't you cry. One of these mornings you're gonna rise up singing. You're gonna spread your wings, and then you'll take to the sky on high. But till that morning, there is nothing to harm you or alarm you. Your daddy and mammy standing by. Chicken is greasy and weather is breezy. Fish are bumping and the cotton is high where the aeroplanes fly. Your daddy is rich and your mother is so good looking. So hush a little baby and maybe you won't cry. Here's why. One of these mornings you're gonna start singing. Hold tight, for-yakky-sacky. You'll spread your wings, and you'll take to the sky on high, no lie. Your daddy was a millionaire, your mother was a contest winner. And so you wake up in the morning. Summertime.
Oh, do ba do, they go marching through all the sweethearts on parade, parade, parade. Can I cry as they pass me by? All the sweethearts are on parade. Popolo, I'd love to join their fun, but they bore me very more. It takes more than one to join the army. Love, and how I find as they fall in line. Oh, the sweetheart long parade.
Hi there, good evening. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. Welcome, Times Insiders. Thank you for turning out on this balmy January night. We're so happy to have you here at the Times. Welcome also to our online audience. If you're watching from afar, please be sure to submit questions. We have such a treat in store for you. Frank Bruni and Gail Collins, two of the sharpest, wittiest, most fantastic and highly read columnists at the Times, here to opine on what the next 4 years will be like under President Trump. To set the stage for this, I'll pull out some insights from Gail's most recent column reflecting on Trump's Thursday press conference. First, a refresher. In case you missed it, the topics included Putin, inaccurate news, secret tapes, secret cameras, Trump's tax returns, hacking, the beauty of the inauguration, a $2 billion deal in Dubai, big pharma, jobs, Russia, and also China. He was all over the place, writes Gail. It was, in a way, a great strategy. We've been waiting for a long time to hear how Trump would deal with his businesses, and his refusal to divest drove ethics watchdogs crazy. But on Wednesday, the whole topic got drowned in the hubbub over the leaked report and Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin and his theory on hotel cameras. This kind of rapid-fire diversion could be the work of a political genius, but in fact, it's just how our next president's mind naturally seems to operate. It bounces hither and yon. The only ongoing focus is what it all means to Trump. Did he look good? How was the crowd? Did anyone betray him? Thank you, Gail. I haven't heard Frank's response to the press conference yet, but I'm willing to bet I'm not the only one in this room or anyone watching who's curious to know his views. So Gail, Frank, over to you and take it away.
This is me, right? We're good?
I think that's you.
Can you all hear us? Is everything good? It's so nice of you all to come out tonight. It's going to be great fun. We're going to have a wonderful time. And I just wanted, before we begin, I just wanted to say one thing, which is that Frank, besides being my favorite columnist to hang out with in the office, is also, as I think many of you know, a man of multitudinous talents. He has been a restaurant reviewer and an Italian bureau chief, and he's a religious columnist. And I just want to say this to point out that next month his fourth book will be published. The first ones were a memoir, a campaign book, a book on education. This one is called A Meatloaf in Every Oven. And it's a book of recipes coming out in February. Do not miss it under any circumstance.
I did not put her up to that, but thank you.
You want to start or should I start?
Well, I want to apologize for my voice.
Go for it.
Probably some of you are in the same situation. It seems everybody is lately. I've been fighting this terrible cold, so I usually don't sound this much like a bullfrog. But you want me to ask you a question first, or you
Sure,
first?
Go for it.
I have one written down. May I look at it?
What a coincidence.
You do too. All right, so here we are in the middle of the confirmation hearings, or not in the middle, actually, at the beginning of them. There probably isn't much that the Democrats can do about Trump's cabinet nominations, because Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster in these situations. Was that a mistake?
You know, every time you change parties, all the rules that seemed ridiculous the last time seem really, really good this time. And I'm hoping that the Republicans think about the future when it comes to the Supreme Court nominations and do not attempt to change the rules on that. But to tell you the truth, I think it makes sense that a president should have the cabinet he wants. I do not personally believe if you get rid of this list of nominees, you're going to get a list of nominees you'd like any better the next time around. So this particular one makes sense to me. Harry Reid has done a lot of weird things over his career, but I thought this one was not wrong, and I'm not prepared to complain about it.
It's very big-minded of you.
I thought so. Thank you.
And actually, I was going to say about, I don't know how many of you were watching the hearings today, but I feel like this is one of those periods where you want to cling to any ray of hope you can find. And it was a really interesting day because the cabinet nominees that Trump chose, some of them some of them very concerning. Today, we at least saw that a number of them have some independence. And in the questioning today, several of them on key points answered that they did not agree with Donald Trump on some rather big matters. And I thought that was pretty fascinating, and I don't know if that bodes for dissent and disagreement going forward, if it was just a piece of theater for the moment. But I do wonder if he has ended up choosing some people who are going to push back. I think that's something that was encouraging to see today.
I have to say, is there anyone in particular that drives you nuts of all the cabinet members? Just makes you go,
Can I get like 3 or 4? Let's get back to that.
Okay. Can I just say mine, though? Because I really...
Absolutely.
There was one of them that just drives me crazy, and it's his nominee for Secretary of Education. Oh, yes. I think going in, again, to be fair, you're going to have a Republican president. You are going to have a person who wants a Secretary of Education who's going to encourage charter schools. That's just sort of a given. But the idea you're going to have one who wants to support bad charter schools as a principled matter, that just makes me crazy.
There are many degrees of school choice, and she's at the very extreme. But I will see you a Betsy DeVos. Is it DeVos, or I always get this wrong? Yeah. I will see you one Betsy DeVos, and I will raise you a Ben Carson.
Oh, yeah. You got a point.
What does he have? What does he have to do with housing or urban development? And then I might see you a Ben Carson and raise you a Rick Perry, who is doing something he said he wanted to get rid of.
Right.
And I'm convinced was chosen because he did well on Dancing with the Stars.
He won my heart with the cha-cha. What can I say? But yes, yeah. We got a lot to think about here, and I'm sure there will be questions along this line when we get to them. But I want to ask you about the Democrats. We're going to be talking so much about Donald Trump and so on and so forth. You wrote a great column, which was aptly titled "The Democrats Screwed Up," after the election, about how they had bungled this whole election season. Now, do you...
With, as we've learned since, quite a bit of help from the Russians, but that's another matter.
That's true. Yeah. We'll get to them, too. But about the Democrats, are you reassured or more worried about what you've seen, about what they're doing since?
I'm actually more worried. I have not yet seen it. It's really early, so I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer. But I'd be curious when we open up to questions if anyone wants to say you've seen things that show you or make you believe Democrats learn from some of the lessons of the election. But I've seen things that make me think they're not learning than that they're learning. It really disturbed me to see how quickly, or rather, how certainly they beat back the challenge for any sort of change in House leadership, any sort of change that would bring more youth into it. Right after that happened, I was down in D.C. To speak to some young, up-and-coming Democrats group. And interestingly, Steny Hoyer came by right before I was speaking to them, and he was talking to them. And he kind of acknowledged that the fact that he was still in his position was a little controversial. And then he said, we cannot be discouraged because we are the party that has been the stewardship of good economic times and economic growth. And then he went on for like 15, 20 minutes with statistic after statistic after statistic. And everybody in that room, and these were technocrats, these were technocratic politicians in the room, all of them started looking at the floor and tuning out because they realized what I did, which is the lesson of this election is you need to speak in bolts and bursts of pure emotion. And you can't stand up there and recite figures and expect people to rally to your cause that way. That suggested they didn't learn much. I don't think what BuzzFeed just did was very helpful because I think Trump is on a campaign to vilify the media to the extent that he renders the media completely irrelevant and impotent. And when you have a news organization making a decision to publish that dossier that's that controversial, and that in my eyes is that irresponsible, you are playing right into his media is awful, don't listen to anything they say hands. That concerns me. I could go on, but a lot concerns me.
Fair enough. I'm sorry. Makes me so depressed.
I know, I'm sick and I'm depressed. Just shoot me, yeah.
Your turn.
All right, Gail. On what issue do you think the Democrats have the best chance of fighting back the Republican agenda?
This is a really ridiculous choice that is just totally off the wall, but still somehow I keep working this through in my head. One of the great things that the Republicans have already started off on is the Planned Parenthood abortion agenda. And it's not Donald Trump's agenda. He sort of adopted parts of it as he went through the campaign, but this is nothing inherent in Donald Trump at all. It's nothing he cares about, although it's hard to tell what difference that makes sometimes. But it's Mike Pence's agenda. And I'm sort of hoping that somehow people can start talking about this in terms of Mike Pence is dictating the way the administration should be going, and make it clear that if we have a strong particularly anti-birth control, anti-Planned Parenthood agenda out there, that's because Mike Pence is really running the administration. All of you, when you get home tonight, mention that to somebody and just keep talking about how if you go after Planned Parenthood and birth control, it means Mike Pence is really running the show. And if we say that often enough, that might be the sort of thing that would really discourage the president from becoming interested in this issue.
Yeah.
That's my thought. It's a plan. It's a plan. Yeah. I've got a plan. The Democrats don't have a plan. I have a plan.
You should be in Democratic strategy.
Speaking of the Democrats again, they often said, and we sort of came a little bit close to this before, that they don't have any bench. Is that fair that they have no bench? And if so, how would you get them a bench?
Well, I don't think it's fair. I think political parties love to feel sorry for themselves and say they have no bench. They have a couple of obstacles when it comes to a bench. One of which is they only hold 1/3 of the country's gubernatorial seats, and traditionally, governors have been a feeder pool of presidents. And some of the governorships they do have that are more prominent, like California, you've got people in it who are very old. But that still leaves, governors out there. There's, if you watch them maneuver, I think John Hickenlooper in Colorado is interested in running. She's not in a kind of political popularity position right now to do so, but I would urge you to keep your eye on Gina Raimondo in Rhode Island, who's a fascinating governor and young and has a really, really interesting combination of private and public sector experience. Obviously, Andrew Cuomo thinks he's on the bench, ready to get off the bench. I don't think, if you've watched him over recent weeks, it's very, very clear he's trying to tee himself up to run. There are many Democratic senators who are of the right age and of the right smoothness. And I think Cory Booker this week is showing how much he wants to run for president. Also, I think it's harder and harder to talk about a bench. And it's sort of foolish even historically, because if you had asked 4 years before Obama became president about the Democratic bench, a lot of people would have left him out by dint of his age and lack of experience. We just elected Donald Trump. He was not on any bench that I knew about, right? So we now have a whole new question, which is, are we even going to be looking going forward at the same traditional feeder systems of candidates? Or when we're talking about Democrats who might run against a Trump in 2020, if he lasts that long, are we talking about people like Tom Steyer and Howard Schultz from Starbucks and Mark Cuban? Donald Trump has opened the door to new kinds of candidates.
I'm trying to think of somebody on a reality TV series this year who might be appropriate. The Bachelor guy who hasn't found love in 4 times around.
I don't know where I was. I just learned this because I was watching something on the site. But apparently, the U.S. ambassador to Denmark has a reality show hit in Denmark. No, I'm not kidding.
I believe you. I totally believe you.
They've done a reality show. Does anyone know about this? Am I the last person? Or?
Read it in the Times.
Okay, was that what? I didn't read it in the Times. I saw it on TV somewhere just yesterday, but maybe they were picking it up. But I'm like, I had no idea. And they were showing the subtitles, and he was playing with his dog, and he was so photogenic. And for all we know, he's the next Democratic
the next guy.
nominee,
Since we're in New York, I should ask you, besides Andrew, what do you think about Senator Gillibrand?
Oh, I think she's someone who thinks a lot. But you know her well. I have not spent much time with her, so I don't know what her. I know she has some big fans. I know she has some people who don't see her in that role, don't think she has the gravitas or whatever you want to call it. But you would know better than I. You spent time with her. What do you think?
Boy, we're not talking about gravitas anymore at this moment in time. Really. Jeez.
So from now on, we ask more if they have a pulse rather than they have gravitas.
No, she's very energetic. She's very ambitious. She's the right age, too. And I think there's going to be a great hunger for a woman as a candidate next time around. And I wouldn't write her out. I would put her ahead of Andrew, I think, as a possibility.
But there are probably some people it would seem quick, but again, Barack Obama was quick. There are probably some people who are taking a careful look at Kamala Harris, who's now in the Senate, and who's a very attractive candidate. And so we just don't know. Also, what we learned from this election with Trump was, first of all, we're not going to necessarily have a traditional wellspring of candidates. But if you looked at Bernie Sanders, he sort of came out of nowhere in a sense, too, although not in terms of youth. Yeah. It's impossible to know who's going to have that particular message that hits the moment's mood so squarely that they have enormous traction. And when people talk in advance about benches and that sort of thing, they're really evaluating things without the most important piece of information, which is what message is that candidate going to come out of the gate with, and what's the country's mood going to be at that precise moment in time.
It does sort of worry me, this whole the idea that you're still going to get young people who are going to be inspired to go out and run for the state legislature and stuff like that, when it's because of what you said. I mean, why do that when you could be, you could have a talk show in Denmark, and that might be a better way to do it. I do worry that that trail that you normally have up, that nobody would ever run for the state legislature if they didn't think they could become president of the United States. And you would be stunned at the people in the state legislature who think that they could become president of the United States, really. But that's, for many of them, of course, some of them it's just public service, but for many of them it's that, that sense that this is the next step in their great, great career. And the more people who come from these weird, side things, the more, less willing they're going to be to collect all those signatures and go through the signature challenges and all the other things you have to go through in New York.
Well, we've also changed somewhat. I mean, in terms of that traditional path of moving up slowly through the state legislature, paying your dues, there's been so much conversation over recent years, and certainly right now with the Trump administration, about the notion that corporate, private world experience matters so much more, or will be so much more helpful than being than marinating in government for years. So you could be getting the message, if you're someone trying to plot a strategy for 10 or 20 years hence, that the worst thing you could do is tuck yourself into government for 20 years, because then people will see you as some sort of cog.
A person who's in government,
right.
God help us.
Gail, is there any issue in particular that we will be, that the Trump administration, Congress will be grappling with in the next 6 months that gives you the worst sinking feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I know you've all got, I can see you sinking right now just thinking about all this stuff. But the one that really just fills my heart with pain is gun regulation of any kind. I mean, you've got, not only do you have a Republican agenda there that's pretty tight, but you have a number of Democrats from red states who are running for re-election, and all their constituents have guns, and they do not discuss it necessarily in the most rational. You've got a guy running for re-election who shot a hole through the environmental protection regulations as part of his campaign last time. He is not going to be a big help for the Democrats. And lately, anyway, that particularly horrible, much beloved by the NRA, rule that would allow people who have concealed carry permits in other states to bring their guns into New York and carry them around New York City, it only didn't get passed by now because we had Barack Obama there ready to veto it. But I just, and that's an issue upon which Donald Trump, who cared not in a whit about guns, a few years back, is now a complete, utter, total convert. He is just manic on the subject. Well, the real reason, I mean, his sons are hunters, and he's, this and that, and he's got a permit, and yada. But the real reason is exactly the same reason he's so crazy about the Mexican wall. Those were his two big applause lines at his rallies. And whenever he said anything about the Second Amendment and guns and shooting and carrying guns, people went crazy, and and that's the same thing with the wall. When he first started running, his very first speech, he mentioned Mexico, immigrants, and the wall, and the place went crazy. And I always thought, if at that moment he had said, poor mothers need more milk, and they had gone crazy, he'd have run an entirely different campaign about, newborn health care. But it's just that, but that's his thing. So that's the one that really scares me. How about you?
It's hard to choose.
Oh, I know there is so many out there.
I'm going to pass on that one.
Well, let's go more positive then. Yeah. You were really taken with a guy named Pete Buttigieg, right?
This is one of his political liabilities. Nobody can pronounce his last name. It's Boot, Edge.
Buttigieg.
Yes.
Got it. The mayor of South Bend, Indiana. You can read that name, and it's one of those names that you kind of blip right over. But he's the mayor of South Bend. He's just 34, and he is now a candidate for DNC chairman. And it's an interesting race anyway, but what particularly captures you about him?
Well, he came on my radar. Actually, I was having a dinner one night with David Axelrod, and the subject of the Democratic bench came up, and whether Democrats had much of a bench. And he said, if you look down younger, there are some extraordinary Democrats around the country. And he said, have you heard much about Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana? South Bend is a city of about 100,000, which makes it a city right next door to Notre Dame. And he has one of those resumes that they love in politics on both sides of the aisle, which means he's got this sort of like serious Ivy League education, but then he's also got some military service. So think Tom Cotton on the Republican side. Seth Moulton is another one on the Democratic side who has this. He went to Harvard. He became a Rhodes Scholar. He has this really interesting mix of things for a 34-year-old, where he also worked for a couple of years as a consultant, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it was with McKinsey or Bain, one of those. So he has sort of a little bit of all this different stuff that people think makes for an informed and good worldview. But when I went and spent some time with him and interviewed him, and I wrote a column about him that was called The First Gay President, ? What really, really struck me was the way he would do his messaging, the way he would frame certain discussions. And he talked very thoughtfully about how Democrats unnecessarily lose the argument to Republicans on various frontiers. And the one example that I thought was really interesting is he said, somehow Republicans, in the minds of people who don't think a lot about politics and just take a quick look, somehow Republicans become known as the party of freedom, of personal liberty, right? They're the party of freedom. Mm-hmm. And he said, but if I can't marry the man I love, how am I free? If I can be discriminated against at work because of the color of my skin or because of my gender, whatever, how am I free? Democrats are the party of freedom. It's just they don't frame so many of the things they're in favor of in terms of freedom. So freedom is not just fewer regulations on your business. Freedom is the government making sure that you will be able to move in any direction you want to move in life and reach as high as you want without being crushed. And I just thought it was so obvious, so thoughtful. He said it much better than I just did, that I thought a lot of what is important to look for in a next generation, and a lot of what the Democrats are grappling with right now, is how do you talk to people in a language that makes clear that you understand them and that makes what your agenda is sound like something very basically important and not a bunch of gobbledygook.
Keep your eye on Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, he's one of the 5 or 6 candidates for DNC chair.
Is that going to be an exciting race, or is it going to be depressing?
Well, I don't think we're going to really experience it as a race, because I think most of the campaigning, so to speak, happens behind closed doors. They're all going to be in Phoenix this weekend talking to Democrats there. Then they'll be in Houston, then Baltimore. Not much of that actually bubbles up to public view.
I like having a candidate to root for, though. I mean, you can just imagine you're at a dinner and suddenly say, my candidate for DNC chairman is Pete Buttigieg. And it's spelled Buttigieg, and you will knock them dead. I mean, they will either get up and leave, or they will be so impressed they won't.
He's going to have to get fairly high levels of accomplishment before your Word program stops underlining his name. Gail, how do you think Chuck Schumer will do as the new minority leader of the Senate, our Chuck Schumer?
I think our Chuck Schumer is going to do great. I mean, he was born to do this job. I mean, I just, now that I think of it, he's been training all of his life for this. And I know he wanted to be majority leader, obviously, but there's something about Chuck Schumer that almost minority leader is almost in some ways better. He's just so scrappy, and he's got lists and plans. And
you get to be angry if you're the minority leader, right?
Yes, but he's angry in a controlled way, which is the way he always is angry. I mean, he's frequently angry, or at least irritated, constantly. But still, he's brought people together. He's very good at organizing, bringing people together. He is so good with bringing people into the leadership. I swear half of the Democrats in the Senate are now the Senate leadership. It's humongous. They could not take a bus together, for God's sake. There's so many of them. But that's all part of the same thing. And he's got, I think he's starting out really so viciously on the healthcare thing is really smart. And he'll probably work with Trump on infrastructure and some of the other stuff. But I just think he'll be great. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I think mostly I agree with you. And I must say, I'm feeling very fond of Chuck Schumer because he donated a meatloaf recipe to the Meatloaf book. So you will find in this Meatloaf book, should you ever see it, recipes from Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Paul Ryan, and Susan Collins from Maine. So it's a very bipartisan and bicameral approach.
Which was the best recipe, would you dare say?
Susan Collins' recipe, a Republican senator from Maine. Chuck's is this weird thing with a meatloaf that's surrounded by a barbecued chicken, and it's just...
It's inclusive. It's damn inclusive.
I think, Nancy Pelosi gave us bison, Paul Ryan gave us venison. I think they literally sat there and thought, what's my political personality refracted in a meatloaf, And that's what we got, which is cool. I will just play devil's advocate on one point. I thought the Make America Sick Again was the silliest thing in the world.
I like Make America Sick Again.
Wait, let me tell you why. Leslie Stahl once told me a story that I thought said a lot about politics in general. I think it was really germane to this most recent election. And she was saying that when she was not as far along in her career, really trying to prove how talented she was and how tough she was, she had done this piece on Reagan when she was covering the Reagan White House that she was convinced was just, really, really unbelievably tough and all that. It ran. And she waited for the people around Reagan with whom she dealt all the time to call and yell at her. Nothing happened. She finally reached out to them and said, what did you think of the piece? And they said, oh, we loved it. And she said, how could that be? And they said, Leslie, all the visuals that you all used were beautiful. Every shot of Reagan made him look statuesque and presidential. And you all think that everyone hears the syllables and the words, and you don't get it, that people experience things in a much more broad brush way. I think the slogan, Make America Sick Again, even though it's an accusation against the other side, is very dangerous because if you just hear Make America Sick Again, it's like, why are these leading Democrats saying Make America Sick Again? So I take issue with that one thing.
We will see how it works out, but you do make a point, I have to admit.
Well, we have to try to disagree on something, right?
Well, you're right.
Okay.
It's hard. It's very, very hard because Frank is so smart. And his meatloaf recipes are unbelievable. Should we have questions?
No, I feel like I should have brought some meatloafs.
It would have been so nice. You could have passed them around and everybody could have a little bit and decide which one was Nancy Pelosi's and which one was Chuck Schumer's. And it would have been great. Sorry, no meatloaf.
Yeah, that's a question.
But we have questions. I would love to hear what you guys want to talk about. Go ahead.
You said, and I would want to agree, that you think the next go around they're going to want a woman. But so much with the 18 other problems that Hillary had was sexist. People didn't want a woman. So carry on, persuade me that the next time it's going to be good to do this again.
The argument about whether Hillary lost because she's a woman, it's grounded on why she lost. And I feel so very strongly that for all the unfairness and everything else, if you look at the way our country has operated since World War II, almost invariably, if you've got a two-term president, the next president's going to be from the other party. There's just a sense of, well, it's time for a change, whatever. And she was operating, I think, against so much bigger a mountain than we realized on that front when she started. And she should have gone to Wisconsin. She should have, and Comey destroyed her. There's 1,000 things, but that, to me, when I think about it again, was the most ongoing one. Next time, there will be a Republican president. And I don't think the Democratic Party is in a place where the Democrats being Democrats are going to say, no, let's not have her because she's a woman. It's just, and there's been this great hunger for a female president forever. Joe Biden used to often say, at least in private, that that he wasn't running for president because the desire of the Democrats for a black nominee and for a woman was so great. He just didn't think he could get around that. And he didn't. But I don't think it's the woman thing. I think it's going to happen. But you guys could tell me you think I'm wrong. Whoever. Anybody else? Any questions? Oh, my God. Over here. This is the question area over here. Go ahead.
You haven't talked about the Electoral College, and I know we can't get a constitutional amendment, but do you see any way to change the way this country elects presidents? like doing it according to the popular vote or any other possible strategy?
I don't think the Electoral College is going away, but I don't understand why we have it anymore. I mean, it does seem to me fundamentally undemocratic. There's actually a movement out there, a popular vote movement, where many state legislatures have passed legislation saying that they would essentially make it so that their electors, that their state would support whoever got, the popular vote nationally, but they're not at the number they need. I don't see it changing. So I don't know what it is we're to talk about when we talk about it, but it's just not democratic. And I mean, this election is a very good example. When you have a popular vote differential that is that large, I don't see how you can feel like you have respected the will of the citizens to the extent that one thinks one is doing in a democracy.
The great division in this country is between the empty spaces and the crowded spaces. And you saw this election, you saw that again. And it's very reasonable. If you live in an empty place, you need a gun. You're not going to rely on the government to do much for you because the government is somewhere else and you're just doing your thing by yourself, and you have to be very independent. If you live in a city, every day you see how the government helps you, how you interact with everybody else, with the government sort of standing there being referee and helper in every way. It's just the most powerful difference that there is in this country. And those empty place people are really, 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 really terrified of us. And it's hard to imagine that changing in my lifetime, certainly, even in Frank's lifetime. I just don't.
My lifetime's not that much longer than yours.
So yeah, I mean, it's obviously not fair, but if I was a person in Wyoming, I can see why I, lay my life down to make sure the Electoral College stayed there. So yeah, nothing's going to happen.
And that's why the conversation about how you reach those people is so incredibly important, because that's a more plausible thing to have happen. That's a more realistic goal than changing the Electoral College in the near future.
For instance, on guns, excuse me, if you had, instead of we had this talk all the time about guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. If we argued about whether or not people who buy guns should be able to shoot them, that great, everybody should have a gun, but first they should pass a test or demonstrate that they can actually hit something with the gun. There'd be no guns. And it would be such a better empty state conversation, I think. I'm sorry, but go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, this is a little bit inside baseball, but will you talk a little, both of you, about how you decide on what columns to write, and how do you know that two columnists won't write about the exact same topic on the same day?
That does come up on occasion. It depends. Some of the placement of the columnists is useful for that. For instance, I'm on with Nick Kristof, and Nick and I generally don't write about the same thing. And when it looks like we might, often because he's right down the hall and we talk about it. This week he was going to write on the convention too, and then he came in and said there was this great thing that just happened about, child sex slavery, and that he was going to go. And can I just say that about Nick Kristof, by the way, just as a little plug? Nick is well aware and has always been well aware that if he goes to the Sudan and risks his life and lives on peanut butter crackers for 4 weeks and gets shot at all the time, when he comes back and writes about it, he will get teeny weeny readership. If he gets up in the morning, rolls out of bed and types something about how Trump is a big turkey, he will get huge readership. He knows this, but he still goes to the Sudan and does all this stuff. That was just in passing. But that's partly it. And then we try to sort of coordinate.
We talk to each other a lot because we're friends. We share an assistant. So we're talking all the time. And we will sometimes actually, one of us will stand down even though we're not on the same days. We've done that a lot, yeah. And some columnists don't really want to enter that conversation with fellow columnists. Some of them, you can almost guess what they're going to write about. And so I'll sometimes write about something because I just know it's not what two other people in relative proximity publication day-wise. And sometimes we do overlap all the time. I mean, it's just bound to happen, especially now, because it's not just what we're writing, but the Times and every other publication is putting so much up on their website, not just from the columnists, but from outside contributors. And I think the feeling is people can pick and choose what they want to read, and if there's duplication, that's not necessarily such a horrible thing.
It bothers us more than it bothers
Yeah.
you when there's duplication.
Well, I'd be very curious. I mean, are you or readers bothered by that duplication when it happens?
No.
Yes, so. Yeah.
But if you both wrote about this, the press conference of yesterday and try to do a humorous column the way yours was, it might then strike me as that, oh, gee, you're
Right.
covering the same topic.
Right, well, we don't write on the same day, and we also talk to each other, so luckily, we're never going to...
We're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Back there, go ahead.
I have a question about the Democratic Party in general these days and how they reacted to the election that we just went through. They did not defend themselves or their candidate strongly enough against the rhetoric that was coming from Trump's campaign. And I don't understand what prevented them. I don't understand what happened to society that they don't stand up against people who don't tell the truth. Or, I mean, they denigrated our candidate, and the Democrats let it go on. I mean, there was Barack Obama who stood up, and Michelle Obama, and there were a couple of Bernie Sanders, but the rest of the Democratic Party just let it all happen, and now everybody's saying, oh, it's unfair, and now everybody's complaining, but what happened back during the election that people didn't stand up more?
I'm not sure I understand. I thought I saw them standing up. I mean, I don't think they rolled over at all. I think their defense ended up not working. But, I mean, I saw many more Democrats than just Barack and Michelle Obama.
But what about the Comey letter?
Oh, I mean, there was fury about that, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't know how the response could have been stronger. It just didn't, the response didn't accomplish what you or I or someone else might have wanted it to.
Today there's an investigation that's been opened.
Just today. Yeah.
There should have been an investigation at the time
Well,
that was open.
yeah. Well, the Comey thing was problematic for the Democrats, too, because even arguing about the badness of Comey, which they certainly did, about the badness of what he did, also brought you back into a discussion in which you were going to mention both emails and Anthony Weiner. And it never worked well. I mean, it's just, you just don't want to go there. So there was a certain desire to change the subject, while there was also a fury at what he had done. So it was a little bit of both, I think, there.
One more thing, though, and in this sense, maybe I do get what you're talking about. I hear you saying in part that there wasn't the pitch of urgency that maybe you would have expected. And I think it's impossible not to remember. I mean, I think it's really important to remember that everyone thought it was in the bag pretty much, right? And when we talk about all those different things, I mean, because any small thing could have tipped this when you look at how few votes we're talking about in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. We're talking about a really, and so whether it's Russian hacking, whether it's Comey, whether it's sexism, any one of those things could explain that margin of vote. But another big thing that we've stopped talking about because there's so much else to talk about is the really bad polling. I think lulled Democrats into a false sense of security. I think it lulled the media into a false sense of security. And I don't think we'll ever be able to measure this, but I wonder how many people didn't take the trouble to go out and vote, who would have preferred to see Hillary Clinton president.
I agree
because
with
they
you.
just didn't think it was going to matter all that much,
That's a really
given
good
what the
point.
pollsters are saying. So I hope that in all this other noise, we don't take our eye off a question that remains unanswered, which is why was that polling so bad? And can we make it better in the future? Or if not, do we need to all stop paying so much attention to those sorts of polls?
Let's
Thank
go over there. And then we're going back there. We have to share the space.
Are the allegations in the Trump dossier going to go away?
That's a good question. What do you think, Frank? Come on.
Have you read the dossier? What? Have you read the dossier? Yeah. I think you had a number of news organizations, including this one, I'm pretty sure, who actually did quite a bit of work to try to see if they could come up with any kind of independent verification of that stuff. Because that dossier was around for a long time. I think I think a lot of those news organizations and more are now trying to see if any of that can be verified independently of the dossier. If it can, then it's not going to go away. But if no one comes up with their own information here, yeah, then I think it invariably, like everything else, fades. What I don't think will fade now or for a long time is this just greater question: why is Donald Trump so fond of Vladimir Putin? And why is Vladimir Putin so fond of Donald Trump? And I think the reason, I don't think there's an excuse for what BuzzFeed did, but I think one of the reasons why it was so hard for everyone to figure out how to handle this or to step away from it is because this dossier exists right in the space of that question: what is this affinity these two men seem to feel for each other, at least in terms of helping each other? And people want an answer to that, and the dossier was one thing that kind of filled that space.
It does feel like, of the things in the dossier, and a lot of them were very kind of the one that, I have to tell you that the sex thing is not going anywhere, I don't think. I mean, first of all, Donald Trump, I mean, who out there is going to say, oh my God, Donald Trump did something weird sexual? I mean, it's not a thing that he's built his candidacy, on. I mean, and it was weird when he came out to deny it, which I believed. I believed his argument about how he was paranoid about cameras in hotels and that
and he's a
germaphobe.
Yeah.
But you never heard him say, I would never do anything like that, or I'm a married man, or what the hey, that did not come up at all. But the thing in there that I still think that has some maybe legs is the question of particularly his Chinese investments as opposed to his Russian investments, which don't seem to be that big. But there's just something about the international finances of Donald Trump's organization and his history that I think we're going to hear more about in the future. Unfortunately, probably not the sex part, which I'm such a low-minded person. I always enjoy it when that kind of stuff happens. Over here, yeah, go ahead. We've got one, okay. Online, this is an online.
Yeah, we have so many questions from an online audience, so here's one from Lori in Connecticut. The president-elect has openly rejected climate change and our ability to reverse its harmful effects. Can either of you comment on likely changes he can or will make? And what can we do to make our voices heard to a president-elect who appears to be tone-deaf to anything he doesn't want to hear?
My guess would be the biggest, if I was thinking about what things would happen first and what stuff he'd really prioritize, I would say look at coal. I mean, and it's hard because nobody wants to use coal anymore, but if there's a way to figure out how to retorp the coal industry, that's going to be high on his list. And certainly I would be surprised if we show up at a whole lot of climate change conferences over the next 4 years. And those would be my two. Do you have any others that in particular?
Well, I was going to take the part about what to do. I worry that what people are going to do, or that all people are going to do in terms of protesting or pushing back against an administration or a presidency that does a lot of things they don't like, is just scream very loudly. And I don't think Donald Trump is impressed by loud screaming unless it's screaming of his name orgiastically. I think that this is a situation where if he ends up with a Democratic House, the Senate's a little harder to change in real time, but if he ends up with a sort of stopgap against stuff he wants to do, that's the most effective way to safeguard your interests and to build some security against some of the initiatives, like rolling back environmental regulations, climate change stuff. And so, the hard, tedious work is recruiting candidates or making sure, when you're looking at the Democratic primaries in your House districts, in just 2 years, that you're recruiting Democrats to go up against Republicans who really, really have a chance to win, that you're putting a lot of resources behind them. Because if he looks up in 2018 and the House, which can swing very quickly because they're all up for election every 2 years, if it's reverted to Democratic control, then a lot of people's worries about his presidency go away right there.
If you're worried about over the next couple of weeks, you're going to be worried about so many things that it's going to be very hard for you to prioritize. Because, oh my God, and he's doing this and that. And climate change is one of those things that certainly I'd be worried about. A lot of people are going to be worried about Planned Parenthood, which is under health care, gun going to come up very fast off the block. I would urge everybody, if you care a lot about climate change, send some money to people who fight for climate change right now. If you care really about, you can always send money to Planned Parenthood. They're really easy to get in touch with. But pick one or two causes that instead of taking a fetal position and going to bed, pick one or two areas that you want to be your areas that you're going to really take a stand on. And talk to candidates, find new candidates, send money to organizations that are already working on these issues. Let's see, go back there, okay. Yeah, you.
I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on Kellyanne Conway and her role in articulating Trump's agenda to the public.
This is Frank's topic. Go ahead.
Wow. I mean, where does one be? I mean, she's a marvel. I mean, I'm mesmerized by her, and I don't mean that as a compliment. Maybe 10% of that is a compliment, but no. I mean, I don't think we have ever seen someone who quite operates at her altitude when it comes to spin. Her ability to simply hear a different question than the one that was asked, her ability to step like 10 yards to the side without ever losing a smile, her ability to kind of change on a dime. I mean, we still haven't gotten an answer how she was not for, and by the way, I don't care what she does in this regard, but 5 weeks ago she was absolutely not going to work in the White House because how could she as the mother of 4 kids? Well, I mean, I think if you track her TV appearances, she's on TV from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., so I don't understand how the White House would be a conflict, and now she is working in the White House. She's one of those, I'll tell you, like she's one of those political DC marvels because you can write. I mean, she's a real creature of Washington, D.C. and American politics in a certain way in terms of being an operative. You can write the most horrible thing about her candidate. And if you run into her in a green room, an hour after it's gone online, you'll get an air kiss, because it's all just part of this kabuki process. But I do think she's significant in another way, which is I really think we have become so polarized and so partisan that this ability to dance around or to just kind of sprint away from the truth is becoming much more common across the board. And I think, and I use this phrase in the comments, I do think she's a kind of perverse role model for a whole new generation of partisans, and I worry that's true on both sides of the aisle. Although right now I think we notice them more conspicuously because they're going through all sorts of contortions and gyrations in defense of Donald Trump.
Go ahead.
No Kellyanne?
Oh, no, you're the Kellyanne guy.
I'm on the Kellyanne beat.
You are the Kellyanne person. Go ahead.
Obviously, the Republicans are racing ahead to repeal Obamacare. They're talking about creating a voucher system for Medicare. And it seems to me, and I would like your view, that do you really think Donald Trump will allow something like that to happen negative to so many people in the country? 20 million people rely on Obamacare. I mean, he obviously has to change it because he campaigned on that. And also, so many people losing the benefits of Medicare. I mean, it doesn't seem plausible, even though the Republicans in Congress want to do it immediately.
As far as Obamacare goes, as far as Medicare goes, he's not going to if any of you are on Medicare, you are really, 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 really safe. Paul Ryan would love to do something about Medicare and Social Security. Donald Trump, one of the few very clear thoughts I have gotten throughout this campaign is that Donald Trump does not want to mess with Social Security or Medicare. And there's not that much, especially in the Senate, of an appetite for that either. Obamacare is the one they're going to go after. I don't know what they're going to do about it. The problem that I worry about is that if you switch it around in certain ways, basically you get down to we're going to screw the poor people who get it through Medicaid. And they're mostly Democrats anyway, so we'll march on through. That's a really cynical way of looking at it, but that's my best take.
No, but I do think your question's a great one because I do think there is concern. I don't know if Donald Trump personally feels it, but there's definitely concern among many Republicans, and there's a lot of division in the party right now. about how do you repeal without replacing, what happens in the interim. There are a lot of people who the arithmetic of their districts or their states works out in a different way, and they're very scared about that. And right now they don't know what they're going to do. And I think what's going to be interesting, Gail mentioned something about Paul Ryan and entitlement programs and that sort of stuff. We have been talking so far tonight, and there's a lot of conversation about what do Democrats do to stand up to Trump, and how does that all shake out. I think the equally interesting question, or the even bigger one, is what's going to happen on the Republican side, because they have the votes. Democrats can only do so much because they do not control either chamber of Congress. But Republicans, Donald Trump is advocating and supporting certain things that certain Republicans are very much against as a matter of their personal brands. That's what you saw yesterday with Marco Rubio's questioning of Rex Tillerson. So I think if Donald Trump is stymied in some ways that might be very important, it's going to have to be by people in his own party. And I think they're in a real peculiar position because some of them, to go along with certain things that the Trump administration is going to push, they're going to have to absolutely contradict who they are. When Trump talks about tariffs and penalties for making goods, that flies directly in the face of the free market principles of someone like Paul Ryan and a whole lot of other people in the House. So are they going to give him those votes? These are actual open questions.
Over there at the end. I'm sorry, I'm making you run around with it. I'm not being efficient about this microphone at all. I'm so sorry.
Much has been made about Jared Kushner. New York Magazine had a cover story. He's well-educated. He's young. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves and think 2020, 2024. But what role do you think he'll play in this administration if he moves forward in this position?
A huge one. I think the two people, as I understand it, from the people I talk to, from the reporting I do, the two people who have the most influence on Donald Trump in his administration right now are Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon, and then probably close to that Mike Pence. It's interesting. The people you see, like the question was asked about Kellyanne Conway, we always forget to ask ourselves, if someone is on TV stating the case with the frequency that Reince Priebus or Kellyanne Conway's, they can't be in the meetings because they're literally physically not in that place. They're never the ones who have the real power. I think Jared Kushner has extraordinary power. I think that's very clear. The thing that I can't get my head around is what does he want to use it for? Some of you probably know them, but you talk to New Yorkers who've crossed paths with Jared and Ivanka over the years. They don't recognize the people who supported this campaign. And what I mean is they don't recognize those two as people who could have been okay with all the ways in which Donald Trump campaigned and some of the positions he took. So I feel like, to me, the mystery is, what is Jared Kushner's soul? Gail, do you want to?
Well, to me, the mystery of the entire what will happen over the next 4 years is, to what degree is Donald Trump actually going to run this administration? If Donald Trump really runs the administration, then somebody like Jared Kushner will be stupendously, stupendously, stupendously powerful, because Trump mostly talks to his family and a very few close associates. Also, he is a man who does not email and does not carry around a phone, so unless you are like right there next to him, your chances of influencing him are not that great. But the other possibility that seems very conceivable to me is that he's just going to be off there wandering, and that the people who are, the Republicans who are Mike Pence and other traditional Republicans who are in the White House, in Congress, are going to put this stuff together themselves, and Trump will just then decide that he made it and did it. But I don't know how that's going to all work out. It's very hard to tell when you've got a president who has no consistent pattern of thinking on anything, what his role is going to be in this stuff.
I'll tell you one person who's absolutely convinced of Jared Kushner's power, and his name is Chris Christie.
Oh, Chris Christie. Whatever happened to Chris Christie? Go ahead.
Facebook, microphone in the back.
Another question from the live audience. This is from Corey, who is a journalism student in Kennesaw, Georgia. Because of his negative view of the media and his obsession for labeling reports as fake news, do you think Trump's presidency will affect the way journalists work?
That's an interesting question. You want to go first?
I feel like I'm sucking on my
I'm sorry, poor thing. You know, that this has been a stupendously difficult election period for reporters, and it's going to continue to be stupendously difficult because, as I said, there's no clear line of thinking here. So traditionally in a campaign, somebody will say something, a candidate will say something, and then you'll poke back and say, well, did you really, and what about then, what about the budget for this? How will that fit into it? Hillary Clinton did that all the time. She would send out these position papers, and there would be diagrams and stuff like that. And you ask Donald Trump these things, and he either forgets he said them or he doesn't care he said them, and he says something completely different. He doesn't have clear lines of thinking, so it's very hard to cover him in a non-personal way because there's just, the ideology is not really there. So you can guess at it, but then you're being personal in a different way. You're personally thinking that ideologically he doesn't really care about this issue or that issue, but it's still all just personal guess because there's nothing there. So it's hard for reporters to frame that, even if they're trying as hard as humanly possible to be objective reporters who are only covering the issue of the day and are not getting into personalities. This administration is going to make that really, really hard. I'm sorry, Frank. Go ahead. Go ahead, yeah.
Why are you sorry?
I'm sorry. Huh?
Why are you sorry?
Because I asked you a question again, but you were sucking your thing, and I was pushing. I didn't mean to be pushy. I'm sorry.
So my question actually picks up on the last one. It's very similar, but it's more specific to the New York Times. I mean, we all know that the New York Times has for a long time been considered a liberal-leaning magazine or newspaper. But right now, the reality is a big chunk of America will not read the New York Times anymore, especially in the post-Trump world. And so when you are writing now, the question is, does the New York Times, what is the New York Times strategy now? Do they just own who they are and say, this is what we're going to report? Because you guys do some great investigative journalism, but let's be real. Only those of us who already sort of believe certain things are reading it anymore. So I'm just curious what the New York Times strategy is going to be moving forward if half the country believes what they're being told about the New York Times.
I mean, but I just, because we do this all the time, that the New York Times has always had this vision, this reputation of being a liberal paper because of its opinion section. And the editorial page of the New York Times is really, really liberal. I would never, ever, I don't think Dwight Eisenhower was the last Republican president that we endorsed. But that has historically and traditionally never had any effect. They divide us up on different floors. They keep us as separate as humanly possible. And the paper has always taken pride in the idea that the news section is not partisan, that the news section does its job. But that's an ideal. The vision of a business model for what's happening now is that you are seeing, and after the election, my God, we got the hugest jump in circulation in the history of the universe, I can't tell you. And it was partly I'm sure people showing support or whatever, but mainly I think it's people just wanting to know that they've got a place they can go every day where they can get good reporting. It's not crazy, it's right on the news, it's solid, it's reliable, and it's someplace they can go. And that's both the business model and the moral mission of the paper, is to be that model of good, solid, hard news reporting, investigations, covering the entire world. We're practically the only place in the country that covers the entire world, that would send like 10, 12 people to cover the Ebola virus in West Africa. We have a bureau in West Africa. All this kind of stuff is just not done anymore in the world. And the Times does all this stuff because that's the business model we have, that this is what a large chunk of the population wants to have access to. And that's what we're going to keep doing. But it makes me feel good that it's not just about the fact that we're really virtuous people who have this high regard for journalism. It's also that we believe that's the business model that will make money and keep us going.
I also would never underestimate the number of conservatives who read the New York Times. Like I happen to know we're the first paper every morning, or I know we're the most frequent website that Ann Coulter visits. Seriously. So never underestimate. And also there are certain, no matter who our readers are, there are certain pieces of information, revelations, scoops, whatever you want to call them, that newspapers will come up with, whether they're on the right or the left, that are such big pieces of information, they travel well beyond that news organization, regardless of who that news organization's readers are. So when our reporters, found out about that, through that odd letter that came in about the enormous tax deduction that Donald Trump had taken that enabled him probably not to have to pay any taxes, I mean, that traveled, that didn't just hit the eyeballs of our liberal slanted readers. That traveled well, well beyond the Times. And one of the interesting things about the current news ecosystem is that when you're talking about some of the raw information you come up with, it ends up being much, much bigger than the readership of your one newspaper on that one news cycle.
Let's see. Back, where's our microphone? We should pick a microphone person. How about this guy right in front of you, right there?
One of the interesting, surprising things from the last few days of confirmation hearings, I thought, was the interaction of Marco Rubio with Tillerson, sort of taking him on about various human rights abuses, and not necessarily only from a conventional right-wing point of view. I'm interested in your thoughts on Rubio, on does that indicate any kind of backbone within, not just of Rubio, but among the Republicans? Is it just, I'm getting ready for 2020 primary challenge? What's your take on that?
Well, I think we'll know about the backbone when the vote comes, right? I mean, I think he's actually put himself in a very interesting situation because he asked some terrific questions. They were the right questions. He asked the right follow-ups. He kept on it. But now he's going to have to vote, and if he votes to confirm Tillerson, send him out of committee and then votes to confirm him on the Senate floor, how does he explain that in terms of the answers he got? I think what you see in Marco Rubio, I mean, that's his brand. He's enormously popular with the neocon crowd, with that whole sort of thinking that certain U.S. values are to be exported and those countries that aren't in sync with those values, are to be kind of vilified and our enemies. So, I mean, he is earning himself enormous goodwill and favor with certain constituencies in the Republican Party who were the ones that promoted him most aggressively in 2000, in this last election, and that would be there for him in the future. So yeah, I think part of it is political. I think part of it is his brand, and I think maybe in that sense deeply felt. But now he's going to have to vote, and that's going to answer your question about backbone. I'd
like to just throw out the thought while we're on the subject of the whole Russia thing that although the thing with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump is clearly very, very weird, the idea that the country might be wise to rethink some of our positions regarding Russia is not insane. I mean, Russia is out there, it is a player, and from what I understand, if you can make a deal with Putin, he will follow through on the deal. It's just that his values are different from our values. But the idea that your goal in life is going to be to destroy Russia and to, surround them with nuclear weapons so they can't do anything and make them more crazed and paranoid every day. It doesn't seem, if only somebody else was doing the rethinking, I'd feel sort of pleased at the idea that we were taking another look at this issue. It's just that it doesn't make any sense the way it's going right now. But the very fact that Marco Rubio is picking this as his thing to be ticked off about makes me wonder again whether we do need to think a little bit more about the whole Russia picture here. Where's the microphone? Oh, right here then. Yes, you. Congratulations. You've won.
I was curious how you guys feel about President Obama's very vocal opinions about being a citizen and voicing his opinion on the Trump presidency and as things move forward.
As an ex-president, what he'll be doing?
As an ex-president, yeah. Working with Eric Holder.
Well, if the idea,
you mean the redistricting project?
If this comes true, that Barack Obama decides to devote his life to fixing redistricting and reapportionment, I will say, go for that, Barack. Wow, that's a huge thing to do. And if he actually does decide to spend a lot of time on that, it will be both a great thing and will make up in part for the fact that he so did not get involved in that stuff when he was president.
It's going to be a fascinating post-presidency to watch, like none of the other ones we've seen in our lifetimes, because of his youth, because of the way in which Donald Trump campaigned against him and questioned his very citizenship. Because if Donald Trump's presidency is an echo of his campaign, it's not going to be a normal presidency. And so Barack Obama, as the most recent holder of the office, is not in a normal situation. He's not in the same situation that George W. Bush was or that Jimmy Carter was. And I know there's an enormous amount of discussion among him and the people around him about how do you navigate that? How do you respect the democratic process? Which is what Hillary Clinton's doing by going to the inauguration. How do you respect the traditions, respect the process, give that new president the benefit of the doubt and the best chance, because we all want good things to happen, but how do you also make sure to speak up when one must really... In a way, Barack Obama's dilemma in this is every citizen's dilemma writ large. How do you keep some faith in what's going to happen so that you're not rooting for a kind of failure that ends up devastating us all? But how do you also stick to the principles you hold dear and speak up when you must speak up? I think a lot of people beyond Barack Obama are asking themselves that question. His voice is so much louder, which is why his answer is probably that much more difficult to come to.
Yeah, go ahead.
From Jean in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. I'm interested to hear from both Frank and Gail what they see as realistic best and worst case scenarios during the Trump presidency.
Wow. Well, worst case scenario, I do not need to describe to you. I mean, the people have been walking around imagining some horrible international, horrible incident that we just fall into. But best case scenario is that somehow or another, maybe with his children there pushing him or whatever, he decides to become something more interesting than he's been, that he decides to try to figure out. I mean, he's in a remarkable situation. This is a man who, until very recently, had Manhattan values about many issues. I mean, he's always hated regulation, and he's always, that goes with it. He's also a guy who doesn't care about deficits. He likes debt. So the possibility, at least, that he'd be willing to spend money on things like a huge jobs infrastructure program, it's conceivable. So I could conceive of him being a guy who steered away from social issues, who spent money on useful programs that will help the country and create more jobs, and that didn't blow anything up. That would be my vision of a great Trump presidency. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the best case scenario is that he ends up doing, maybe not in the exact form, but he ends up doing some things that actually Barack Obama wanted to do but couldn't because he didn't have the cooperation of Congress. So the best case scenario is that we look up 9 months from now and we don't have the exact infrastructure legislation or package that we want, but we are doing investments in infrastructure that are long overdue and that we really should be doing. And they may not be perfect, but they're better than nothing. There are a number of best case scenarios like that where there are some things where there is bipartisan agreement that something should be done, not necessarily bipartisan agreement or almost never bipartisan agreement about how it should be done, but he has undivided government, which is a great luxury that most presidents don't have for that many years, and he is, for whatever reason, sometimes accidentally can be a brilliant salesman. So if he's steered in the right direction by instincts we don't understand, by surprises we don't see coming, or by people around him whom we're underestimating. I mean, if you listen to those hearings today and you listen to some of the stuff that Mattis was saying and some of the stuff Mike Pompeo was saying, you thought, well, wow, they may actually be in here not to rubber stamp what Trump wants to do, but they may actually be in here to try to mold him in a different direction, which is, I know from reporting I've done, why Mitt Romney wanted in that administration. So the best case scenario is there's some people in there who use Donald Trump well, and that because we don't have divided government, he actually ends up doing some stuff that wouldn't be so bad to have done, maybe not in the ideal form, but in an acceptable form. Is that a crazy fantasy?
It's a little crazy, but still, it's where we're going. Let's go for it.
I'm trying to be an optimist.
And poor Frank, you're so sick, too. This is terrible. Go ahead, you, sir. They're coming at you.
As I've listened to you and pulled together some of your thoughts, I wonder if the ideologue and the opportunist who are our administration if there are the reins to hold them back from doing something that could be calamitous, along the lines Gail mentioned earlier. In my adult lifetime, we've gone to war on things that weren't really what they were represented to be, starting with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And I was in Vietnam when I learned just recently that Richard Nixon prolonged that war. So I just wonder if, as I've read about and heard about the various cabinet posts, for example, Calvin Trillin suggested in this week's New Yorker that the president is looking for a fox for every hen house. What do you think? Is there the gumption in Washington to put the reins on something like that?
Well, well, first of all, when you were talking, of course, Mike Flynn came to mind. Very, very scary. And I mean, it's so confusing because at the same time that you have, Madison Pompeo giving answers in hearings that you think, well, that's a little bit reassuring. You have Donald Trump appointing RFK Jr. vaccine czar. It's insane. Yeah, so it's really hard to know what to make of this. I come back to the Republicans. The problem is the Democrats don't have the numbers to prevent calamity from happening. Republicans do. In the sense that, they don't have a Senate majority that's so huge that if a number of them stand up and say, no, I will not let that happen, Donald Trump has a problem. But there's something so rash about him. There's something that's just so, adolescent or infantile at times. That, you mentioned war. I think someone said best case, worst case scenarios. I really tremble at the thought of conflicts that we could end up in because someone insulted Donald Trump in the wrong way on the wrong day. It's terrifying.
But it is also, if I'm trying to think positive about this, he does, since he has no real foreign policy theories about things, he hasn't come up with any kind of reactions other than personal reactions to things. It is conceivable that you could see the country taking off on a more conservative in the sense that we're not going to get involved in as many things overseas, a more isolationist, but not incredibly crazy isolationist kind of view of the world. It's not, given the fact that this is a man who wants to spend more money on the military, which is sort of insane, if you're at all interested in making the country more efficient. But he's open at least. Most people come into this office with very set ideas about the other countries and whether they're bad or good and what we need to do and how we need to react and what the State Department should do. And not only does he not have those ideas, but his Secretary of State to be doesn't appear to have many of these ideas either. So it's not a good scenario, but I'd like to think maybe there's a possibility it will wind up taking us in a more creative direction.
Gail, when you were saying not set ideas around countries, we forget. I've always maintained that one of the reasons Donald Trump gets away with so much that he does is because it comes in such volume and at such a velocity that any three of the worst things that he did during the campaign would have sunk someone else. But because they were in the midst of 300 for him, it all became like white noise. And I just realized we haven't talked in weeks because so much has happened about that crazy transcript we got of the Pakistan call. Where it seemed like he didn't even understand anything about the country he was talking to, or the fact that he campaigned in a way that completely vilified it. And he's saying,
we love Pakistan. It's the best country in the world.
But
no better democracy.
A week goes by and so much other news has come along.
It does come and go really, really fast.
Forward 3-4 weeks and have him make the same comment about blowing the Iranian ships out of the water. And that would be the commander-in-chief speech.
And it's
That's right.
All we can hope for is that calmer heads will.
I don't think you're going to see you said you noticed then it'll be the commander, and we keep waiting for the presidential pivot. That's clearly not. That's clearly not going to happen. Like everyone said when he got the nomination. Remember, he said, "I could act more presidential. I'm going to act so presidential, you're going to be bored." I'm not bored. But I think the one thing we really do know is that this pivot to a more. This is a totally new model for the presidency. And he's not going to take that oath of office next Friday and suddenly the next day stop tweeting. That's clearly not going to happen.
No, that will not. I just want you all to have a little bit of hopeful cheer for a week or two before we get into this. We only have time for one more question back there. Miss? Yeah, go ahead. It's coming at you. There's a microphone coming behind you.
Thank you so much for this. It's been a really great night. I was wondering how this election cycle will influence future election cycles, and if we will see any changes that are a direct result of anything that happened over the last couple of years.
I'll just give a few quick ones,
Yeah,
then I'll let
go
you
ahead.
wrap it up. I think you're going to see people thinking about running for office who didn't before because Donald Trump succeeded in grabbing the presidency. I think you're going to see a whole new approach to or abandonment of polls to the extent that we did. I think those are the two biggies. And then the question I can't answer is what's going to happen in the consumption of news, because it was one of the sort of things behind a question that was asked earlier, but I think one of the scariest things that's happening in our country is the fact that no three people are reading the same news, getting the same information, even participating in the same national narrative, because the ability to customize and curate your information feed and exist solely in an echo chamber. And I don't know how politics and candidates are going to adjust to that.
I'm thinking you may wind up in the foreseeable future with a point at which the choices are so drastic between one thing and the other that you'll find people engaged in a new way, because suddenly you're not talking, as we normally do in politics, about things that are so squished and fixed, and by the time you get to the end, you're not quite sure whether it's even still a bill anymore or it's something else. That this stuff could be so dramatic that people will get involved in a level they haven't been in a long time, and that cannot be bad for the country. And that's such a positive thought that that's what we're going to leave it. Thank you so much for being here.